Hello. Time for another story from the depths of the public domain. This is a science fiction short story titled Category Phoenix, written by Boyd Ellanby. First published in Galaxy Science Fiction, May 1952. I have never read this story, and I have no idea what it is about. There are no chapters in my copy, so I will be breaking it into parts at my own discretion. Once again, I will say I am not a voice actor, nor will I pretend to be one. With that said, I hope this is an interesting story, and let us begin. The doorknob turned, then rattled. Dr. David Wong stepped out from behind the large bookcase, listening. He pressed the brass handle of the top shelf, and the case silently pivoted back to become part of the wall, obliterating the dark passage behind it. An imperative knocking began at the door. David walked softly to his desk and picked up his notebook. He tried to remain relaxed, but he could feel the tightening of his shoulder muscles. With his right hand, he shut his notebook and concealed it under a mass of papers, while his left hand pressed the button to release the lock of the door. The door burst open, and two men strode in, a black uniformed ruler, followed by a watchguard. Black visored cap still on his head. The first man marched to the desk and spoke without ceremonial greeting. The door was locked, Dr. Wong. Correct, Dr. Lanza. The door was locked. I shall have to instruct the guard to report it. Have you forgotten Leader Marley's maxim? Constructive science does not sulk behind locked doors. Wong leaned back in his chair and smiled at his visitors. The wisdom of Leader Marley is a constant help to us all, but his generosity is also a byword. Surely you remember that on the 10th anniversary of his ascension, he honored me by the grant of occasional hours of privacy as a reward for my work on Blue Martian fever. I remember now, said Dr. Lanza. But what for? Asked Officer Balgan. It's antisocial. Evidently you have forgotten, Officer Balgan, another maxim of Leader Marley. Nature has not equipped one category to judge the needs of another. Only the leader understands all. Now, Dr. Lanza, will you tell me the reason for this visit? Since your promotion from research to ruler, I have rarely been honored by your attention. I am here with a message, said Lanza. Leader Marley's compliments, and he requests your presence at a conference on next Wednesday at 10 in the morning. Why did you have to deliver that in person? What's wrong with using communications? It's not my province to ask questions, Dr. Wong. I was told to come here, and I was told to wait for a reply. Next Wednesday at 10. Let's see. This is Friday. Dr. Wong pressed the key of his electronic calendar, but he had no need to study the dull green and red lights that flashed on to indicate the pattern of his day. He did not delude himself that he had no real choice, but he had learned in the past 15 years that it kept up his courage to preserve at least the forms of independence. He allowed a decent 30 seconds to ponder the coded lights, then blanked the board and looked up with an easy smile. Dr. Wong's compliments to Leader Marley, and he will be honored to attend a conference on Wednesday at 10. Nodding his head, Dr. Lanza glanced briefly around the office. Queer, old-fashioned place you have here. Yes, it was built many years ago by a slippery old politician who wanted to be safe from his enemies. Makes a good place for research, don't you think? Lanza did not answer. He strode to the door, then paused to look back. You understand, Dr. Wong, that I shall have to report the locked door. I have no choice. Has anyone? Officer Balgham followed to his superior, leaving the door wide open behind them. Dr. Wong remained rigid in his chair until the clack of heels on marble floors had become a mere echo in his brain, then stretched out his hand to the intercom. He observed with pride that he did not tremble as he pressed the dial. Get me Dr. Carl Haslam. Carl, can you meet me in the lab right away? I've thought of a new approach that might help us crack the White Martian problem. Yes, I know we planned on conferring tomorrow, but it is getting later than you think. Again, he pressed the dial. Give me Lee Hatchovnik. Lee, I've got some new stuff to dictate. Be a good girl and come right away. Breaking the connection, he drew out his notebook and opened it. David Wong was a big man, tall, well-muscled, compact, and he might have been handsome, but for a vague something in his appearance. His lean face and upcurved mouth were those of a young man. His hair was glossy black, too thick to be disciplined into neatness, and he was well dressed, except for the unfashionable bulging of his jacket pocket, where he carried a bulky leather case of Everfeed pens and notebooks. But it was his eyes that were disconcerting. An intense blue, brilliant and direct. They had a wisdom and comprehension that seemed incongruous in his so young face. A worried frown creased his forehead as he turned back to one of the first pages, studying the symbols he had recorded there. But he looked up without expression on hearing the tapping of slender heels. Quick work, Lee. How are you this morning? As if anybody cared, Lee Hatchovnik settled down before the compact stenograph machine, her shoulders slumped, her thin mouth drooping at the corners. Feel like working? Said David. As much as I ever do, I guess. Sometimes I wonder if the traders in the granite quarries have it any worse than I do. Sometimes I wish I'd been born into some other category. Other people have all the luck. I don't know what it is, Dr. Wong, but I just don't seem to have the pep I used to. Do you think it could be the climate here in New York? People do grow older, Lee, he reminded her gently. I know, but Tanya, do you remember my twin sister Tanya, the one that got so sick that time 10 years ago? When you did that experiment with blue Martian fever, and she had to be sent out to Arizona? Of course I haven't seen her since. Then people in the office category never get permission for that kind of travel. But she writes me that ever since she got well again, she feels just like a kid, and works as hard as she ever did, and she seems to enjoy life. Why? She's had 3 proposals of marriage this year alone, she says, and yet she's 35, just the same age as I am, being twins, you know, and nobody's proposed to me in ages. Well, I'm certainly going to try to find out what her method is. She's coming back tomorrow. She's what? Coming back. Bureau Med is sending her back here, to the Institute, to take up her old job in Intercom. Funny they haven't told you, her being an old employee and all. Dr. Wong was gripping his notebook in stiff fingers. But he replied easily, "Oh well, Bureau Med is a complex organization. With all they have to do, it's not surprising they get things mixed up sometimes." "Don't I know," she sighed, and droned on in a dreary monotone. "This one institute alone would turn your hair gray before your time. I don't know how some people seem to be so young. I was just thinking to myself this morning when I watched you walking through the office. Why, Dr. Wong doesn't seem to age a bit. He looks just as young as he ever did. And look at me." Looking at her, David admitted to himself, was not the pleasure it had once been. 10 years ago, she and her twin sister Tanya had been plump, delectable, kittenish girls, their mental equipment more than standard for office category, of course, but their physical appearance had been outstanding, almost beautiful enough for theater category. Creamy ivory skin, gray eyes, and soft red hair, dramatized by a freakish streak of white that shot abruptly back from the center of the forehead. Tanya swirling to the left, and Lee's to the right, one girl the mirror image of the other. But Lee, sitting before him now, was thin and tired-looking. Her sallow skin was lined, and her soft voice had become vinegary with disappointments. Her red hair had faded to a commonplace brown, and the white streak in the center was yellowed. An unwanted, souring old maid, but there was only one response to make. "You look fine to me, Lee." He said, "What time did you say your sister was coming?" "Tomorrow evening. Playground jet. Why?" "Well, have to think of a way to celebrate. But right now, I'd like to get started on my new paper. I've got to meet Dr. Haslam before long." "I know." She raised her faded gray eyes. "That was a funny thing you said to him just now over the intercom. You said to him it was getting late. But it isn't late. It's only 11 o'clock in the morning." David stared. "Do you mean to say you were listening to our conversation? Why did you do that?" She fidgeted and turned away from him. "Oh, I just happened to be at the comm desk and guessed the circuit wasn't closed. Doesn't matter, but it seems a funny thing for you to say. People in office category are not supposed to understand research," he said severely. "If they were capable of research, Leader Marley's planners would have placed them there. As for it being late, it is. As for white Martian fever is concerned, which is the subject of my paper, prepare to take dictation." Shrugging her shoulders, she poised her bony fingers over the keys of the little machine. "Paper for delivery at the summer seminar," he began. "But Dr. Wong, that doesn't have to be ready for 3 months yet." "Miss Hatch-Novick, please remember Leader Marley's maxim. Individuals born into office category are the bone and muscle of the state. Nature has designed them to act, not to think." "Yes, Dr. Wong, I'm sorry." "Don't worry, Lee. We're old friends, so I won't report you. All set?" He took a pencil from his leather case and tapped it against his notebook as he ruffled the pages. wondering how to begin. It was hard to think logically when a part of his mind was in such confusion. Had Lee been listening into all of his phone conversations? If so, it was fortunate that he had long ago devised an emergency code. Was it only idle curiosity that had prompted her, or was she acting under orders? Was anyone else watching him, he wondered, listening to his talk, perhaps even checking the routine of his experimental work? There was Lanza this morning. Why had he come unannounced, in person, when a communication call would have served the purpose equally well? Lee's voice broke in. "I'm ready, Dr. Wong." He cleared his throat. The summer seminar. Title: The Propagation of White Martian Virus. Paragraph: It will be remembered that the early attempts to establish Earth colonies on Mars were frustrated by the extreme susceptibility of our people to two viruses native to the foreign planet. Viruses which we designate as Blue Martian and White Martian, according to the two distinct types of fever which they cause. Blue Martian fever, in the early days, caused a mortality among our colonists of nearly 85%, and made establishment of permanent colonies a virtual impossibility. Under the inspired leadership of Leader Marley, and with advice of his deputy, Dr. Lanza, this laboratory in research worked out a method of growing the virus and producing an immunizing agent, which is effective in nearly all human beings. Only the cooperation of several categories made possible such a feat. It will not be forgotten that even the humblest helpers in the Institute had their share in the project, that some of them acted as human volunteers in the experiments, well knowing the risks they ran, and were afterwards rewarded by free choice. One person, in office category for instance, was given the privilege of learning to play the flute, although nobody in his family had ever belonged to music, and another person, in the menial category, was permitted a month's study of elementary algebra, a nearly unheard of indulgence for a person in his position. But as Leader Marley so graciously remarked in conferring the awards, to the individuals who risk much, the state gives much. Like me and Tanya, the girl asked, stopping her typing. Yes, like you and Tanya. You were allowed to act a part in an amateur theater group, I remember. And since Tanya was made too ill to be able to use a free choice, she was sent out west to the playground, just as though she had belonged to a ruler category. Now where was I? The state gives much. Oh yes, paragraph. Since the discovery of the immunizing mechanism to Blue Martian, permanent colonies have been established on Mars, but there remains more elusive problem of White Martian fever, which, through its mortality, is only 30%, is still so crippling to those victims who survive that the Martian colonies cannot begin to expand, and the resource of the planet cannot be fully developed until an immunizing agent is found. For the past 8 years, this laboratory has been working at the problem, among others, and we are now in a position to report a small degree of progress. Since it proved to be impossible to grow the virus in the usual media, it occurred to us. The intercom buzzed, and Dr. Wong turned away to open the dial. "David, what's happened to you?" I've been waiting here in the lab for a quarter of an hour. Sorry, Carl. I thought I had more time. Be right down. He reached for his white lab coat and shoved his long arms into the starched sleeves. That's all we have time for, Lee. Can you get an early lunch and be back here this afternoon at 2? But she was not listening. She was leaning over to look at the desk, staring avidly at the open pages of Dr. Wong's notebook. Without comment, he picked up the book, closed it, put it in the top drawer, and locked the drawer. She watched him with curious eyes. What funny marks those were, Dr. Wong. Do you keep your notes in a private system of shorthand? No. I write them in Coptic, for the sake of privacy. What's Coptic? A dead language, spoken by the ancient Egyptians 30 or 40 centuries ago. But you're in research, not linguistics. It's against the law for you to know other languages. Are you a traitor? My dear Lee, he said, I'm far too sensible a man to go in for bootleg study, to learn anything without permission. I have no wish to end up with a pickaxe in my hand. But you shouldn't tax your little mind with thinking. It's not your job. You're not equipped for it. And it's dangerous.